your side, you know you must be doing something very, very wrong. These are radical, anarchistic, anti-American young people who have no knowledge of what's going on. I'll give you an example. Some of the students are calling for a ceasefire. Do any of them know that Israel offered a ceasefire and that the Secretary of State said the only thing that stands between the civilians in Hamas and a ceasefire, the civilians in Gaza and a ceasefire is Hamas. It's all Hamas's fault. The deaths are Hamas's fault. They use human shields. The hunger is Hamas's fault. They won't allow food to come in without them stealing it. But these kids are utter ignoramuses, and the faculty are the worst because they're the ones who have been propagandizing these kids for years and years and years. And now you have universities like Northwestern and Brown saying we're going to give in to these people and we're going to hire more Palestinian professors, more supporters of Hamas. We're going to allow more people to come in as students. You don't give in to lawlessness in this way. You don't give in to terrorism. And what really concerns me, because I have experience in this, I represented a lot of the protesters in the 60s and 70s. These protesters, some of them, will become terrorists. They are being groomed by Hamas. Hamas will ask them to plant bombs. They will do it. And it's coming to a theater near you.
And that's what... In order to achieve a completely, quote, equal society, he sought to seize power through any means, while at the same time destroying the existing social system. He has been called the Lenin of the post-communist left and its Sun Tzu. In Rules for Radicals, published in 1971, Alinsky systematically set forth his theory and methods of community organizing. These rules include, quote, a tactic that drags on too long becomes a drag, keep the pressure on, the threat is usually more terrifying than the thing itself, ridicule is man's most potent weapon, and pick the target, freeze it, personalize it, and polarize it. The essence of his rules was about using immoral means to achieve his goals and gain power. The nature of Alinsky's seemingly dry rules for community organization becomes clear when they are applied in the real world. When the Vietnam War was still in progress in 1972, George H.W. Bush, then U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, gave a speech at Tulane University. Students at the university who were against the war sought advice from Alinsky, who said that protesting with the usual methods would likely result simply in them being expelled. He thus suggested that they don Ku Klux Klan garb, and whenever Bush defended the Vietnam War, they'd stand up with placards and say, quote, the KKK supports Bush. The students did so with very successful attention-getting results. Alinsky and his followers were delighted with two other protests he planned. In 1964, in negotiations with Chicago city authorities, Alinsky concocted the plan of organizing 2,500 activists to occupy the toilets in Chicago's O'Hare International Airport, one of the busiest in the world, to force its operations to grind to a halt. Prior to actually carrying off the plan, he leaked the plan, thus forcing the authorities to negotiate. In order to force Kodak, the major employer in Rochester, New York, to increase the ratio of black employees to white, Alinsky came up with a similar tactic, seizing on an important cultural tradition in the city. An upcoming performance of the Rochester Philharmonic Orchestra, Alinsky planned to purchase hundreds of tickets for his activists and feed them baked beans beforehand, so they could fill the theater and ruin the performance with flatulence. This episode didn't come to fruition, but the threat of it, as well as Alinsky's other tactics, enhanced his position in negotiations. Alinsky's book leaves the impression of a sinister, cold, and calculating individual. His use of community organizing was really a form of gradual revolution. The differences between Alinsky and his forerunners were several. First, both old and new leftists were at least idealistic in their rhetoric, while Alinsky stripped revolution of its idealistic veneer and exposed it as a naked power struggle. When he conducted training for community organizations, he would routinely ask the trainees, why organize? Some would say that it was to help others, but Alinsky would roar back, you want to organize for power. In the training manual that Alinsky followers went by, it said, quote, we are not virtuous by not wanting power. We are really cowards for not wanting power. And, quote, power is good. Powerlessness is evil. Second, Alinsky didn't think much of the rebellious youth of the 60s who were publicly against government and society. He stressed that whenever possible, one should enter the system while biding time for opportunities to subvert it from within. Third, Alinsky's ultimate goal was to subvert and destroy, not to benefit any group. Thus, in implementing his plan, it was necessary to conceal the real purpose with localized or staged goals that were seemingly reasonable or harmless by themselves, to mobilize large crowds to action. When people were accustomed to being mobilized, it was relatively easy to mobilize them to act toward more radical goals. In Rules for Radicals, Alinsky said, any revolutionary change must be preceded by a passive, affirmative, non-challenging attitude toward change among the mass of our people. Remember, once you organize people around something that's commonly agreed upon as pollution, then an organized people is on the move. From there, it's a short and natural step to political pollution, to Pentagon pollution. A leader from Students for a Democratic Society, who was deeply influenced by Alinsky, nailed the essence of radicalizing protests. Quote, the issue is never the issue. The issue is always the revolution. The radical left after the 60s was deeply influenced by Alinsky and always turned the response to any social issue into dissatisfaction with the status quo overall, as a stepping stone for advancing the revolutionary cause. Fourth, Alinsky turned politics into a guerrilla war without restraint. In explaining his strategy for community organizing, Alinsky told his followers that they need to hit the enemy's eyes, ears, and nose. As he writes in Rules for Radicals, quote, first the eyes. If you have organized a vast, mass-based people's organization, you can parade it visibly before the enemy and openly show your power. Second, the ears. If your organization is small in numbers, then do what Gideon did. Conceal the members in the dark, but raise a din and clamor that will make the listener believe that your organization numbers many more than it does. Third, the nose. If your organization is too tiny even for noise, stink up the place. Fifth, from his actions in politics, Alinsky emphasized using the most evil aspects of human nature, including laziness, greed, envy, and hatred. Sometimes participants in his campaigns would win petty gains, but this only made them more cynical and shameless. In order to subvert the political system and social order of free countries, Alinsky was happy to lead his followers to moral bankruptcy. From this, it can be inferred that if he were to truly gain power, he would neither take care of nor pity his former comrades. Decades later, two prominent figures in American politics who were deeply influenced by Alinsky helped to usher in the silent revolution that has subverted American civilization, traditions, and values. At the same time, the no-holds-barred, unrestricted guerrilla warfare type protests advocated by Alinsky became popular in America from the 1970s on. This is clear through the, quote, vomit in protest in 1999 against the World Trade Organization in Seattle, where protesters ingested a drug that induced vomiting, then collectively vomited in the plaza and conference center. The Occupy Wall Street movement, the Antifa movement, and so on. It's important to note that in one of the introductory pages for Rules for Radicals, Alinsky gave his, quote, acknowledgement to the very first radical.
Any international forum will stop Israel from defending itself.
The siren sounded for 2 minutes, bringing the nation to a halt to honor the millions of Jews murdered by the Nazis during the Second World War.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and President Isaac Herzog attended a wreath-laying ceremony at a Holocaust Memorial Museum in Jerusalem.
Some soldiers marked the day at the Nova Music Festival site, the location of the bloodiest incident in the Hamas terror attack on southern Israel.
The memorial was Israel's first Holocaust Remembrance Day since the October 7th attack, adding additional meaning to the already somber day. And Israel's Holocaust commemorations this year have a powerful significance for 6 elderly survivors. They're deeply affected by the Hamas terror attacks that sparked the ongoing Gaza war. Here's their story.
86-year-old Bella Haim fled with her family as a child from Poland during World War II. On October 7th last year, Her grandson Yotam, like her a resident of a village near the Gaza border, was taken hostage by Hamas. He managed to escape, only to be accidentally shot dead by Israeli soldiers. The trauma drove Haim to return to Poland, where she will on Monday take part in the March of the Living at the site of the Auschwitz death camp. The annual ceremony is timed to coincide with Israel's Holocaust Memorial Day. Holocaust commemorations this year have a searing significance for her and 6 other elderly survivors now deeply scarred by the Hamas attack that sparked the ongoing Gaza war.
What happened here on October 7th, it's impossible to believe. I see the huge picture mounted in the new library in Jerusalem with all those who were killed and murdered. It's impossible. To this day, I cannot fathom. I'm running away from it.
A veteran campaigner for peace with the Palestinians, Haim said she would no longer pursue that activism. Now what interests me is only my people, she added. Among those joining her will be 90-year-old Daniel Luz. His hometown kibbutz Be'eri lost a tenth of its residents to the Palestinian attackers. In some ways, he said, that ordeal was worse for him than the European war, when he escaped Nazi roundups in his native France, although half of his family perished in Poland.
In France, as a child, I suffered all kinds of traumas that I've learned to cope with. But in Be'eri, it was the first time that I felt the fear of death.
On October 7th last year, he woke up to the sound of Arabic yelling and gunfire. A neighboring house was riddled with bullets. Lutz was untouched. He says he imagined the souls of the 6 million Holocaust victims steering Hamas away from him.
An 88-year-old Holocaust survivor is participating in a new digital campaign called Cancel Hate. The New York-based Conference on Jewish Material Claims Against Germany launched the initiative recently. NTD's Andrew Thomas has the latest.
You see those red lights down there? They just went out. Now you can go. Until they go out, you gotta wait. I don't know who told y'all you can do something that you shouldn't. You gotta think of it as a regular traffic signal. Okay? As long as it's green, you can go. When it turns yellow, you have to prepare to stop. When it's red, you stop and wait until it goes green again. See those red flashing lights down there? They went out. Until that happens, you gotta sit there and wait. I know you don't want to, but that's the law.